Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar, Data Ductus Practical Data Integrity. We have approximately 24 attendees right now and it's filling up. So let's get started everyone. This data integrity webinar is a practical webinar about the data integrity, and we are going to touch base on the regulatory part as well, but we are not going to dive into all aspects of the regulatory parts, only the parts that are related to have extra difficulty basically. So I will start with a short introduction about Data Ductus, very short introduction, and then I dive into European Union Annex 11 and Part 11. And then we are talking about a little bit what is data integrity and define it a little bit shortly because I don't know the knowledge level of everybody that is joining. And then we dive into practical things like audit trail with example and the tools needed and practices needed to do that. After that, we will discuss also how to manage data integrity in your company, what type of routines we need to have, and what type of quality processes that needs to be there to manage it in a proper way. And after that, we talked about difficulties with data integrity from a practical point of view. And we will discuss, finally, we will discuss some important topics like static and dynamic data and open vs closed system. And then we're going to take some questioning and answer. And I have received a lot of questions beforehand already. But feel free to put your questions in Swedish or in English, and please don't use the private question button to write your questions in the question list. All of your questions will be anonymous, so that's okay. A little bit about me. My name is Amin Gholiha, and I have 15 plus years with experience with pharma medical, putting advanced software solutions and medical devices on the market. That includes 510K submissions, and I have also some experience with pharma production and GXP audits from different regulatory authorities, and being involved in some tricky data integrity issues and resolve that. So hopefully you will get some practical information from us, or mistakes that cannot be redone for you, basically. So a little bit about the Data Ductus. Data Ductus is a full-service software engineering consultancy company. Our strength is IT, but we know a lot about the regulatory parts and the pharma industry as well. The company was founded 1989 in Stockholm, Sweden. It's privately held. We are 250 employees. And our employees are in Skellefteå, Uppsala, Stockholm, Malmö, Luleå, Kiruna, and in the United States, we are in Denver, Dallas, and Boston. We are in Singapore and Tokyo as well. And we have a full service operation doing all aspects of the IT. We manage network and organization. We have IT and IoT systems, and within the IT and IoT system is the medical part resides in there, and we have IT service management. We are helping companies with all the aspects of IT. We are have operational services. We have advisory services. We implement off-the-shelf products and services, and also develop custom solutions. So we do all 360 perspectives basically. And we are also partners with major software companies as well. Strong partners where majority of our revenues comes together with them basically. And a little bit about our core team. We have a medical device core team in-house, and all of them are all of our developers, project leaders, and consultants that we have in-house. They are educated in all of the regulatory requirements that exist and have some experience as well from the field. Our average development experience is 10 plus years. Some have more and some have less, but it's 10 plus years. And PhD, we have many PhD level experts, and we are used to work with the classical V model development and also agile development, but in the regulatory environment that the pharma industry is in, with design control and everything that needs to be there. So Data Ductus, why should you use Data Ductus? You will receive faster time to market because of knowledge and our IT expertise. You will have regulatory compliant products because everybody that works within our house are very knowledgeable with that and understand the regulatory constraints. It is very uncommon to have hybrid personalities that knows the technology behind IT and development and at the same time understands the QA and the regulatory aspects of it. We have a very cost-efficient development since we are also active within other industries, and we have a very cost-efficient cost structures and business models. We are very good at utilizing real-time user data for product development, and our hope is that we are using the latest digitalization technology to improve patient care and help you to improve and digitalize your company. And finally, but not leastly, we are very good and we have many experts in computer security, development security, and also privacy, both from technology point of view and also from the legal aspects of it. You can read more about our services. I don't want to talk about Data Ductus too much. I wanted to give you more value instead. But our services, you can read more about our services at dataductus.com/medical. And please email me for personal one-to-one meeting regarding data integrity or cloud solutions. And I wanted to just emphasize that we are going to have a very nice webinar that is called How to Implement a Medical Cloud Solution. And this is really a webinar that discusses how you can utilize new technology to digitalize your company. And you should come to that. I just want to say that it's a very good webinar with a lot of experts and know-how. I think you will take a lot of good information from that webinar with you. If you're in a transaction phase or if you have a cloud solution in-house, and this webinar is good for quality assurance for managers or for product owners or even validation engineers or IT knowledgeable people that wanted to understand how to maintain and run and a SaaS service basically. This is a little bit about the speaker's notes about medical cloud webinar. So let's dive into data integrity. Before I go on, I just wanted to have a little bit short discussion about the European regulation against FDA Part 11. For the most case, I will talk from the FDA Part 11 point of view, but I'm going to do a very small comparison between European regulations and FDA. They are very comparable. There are some small differences between them, and some of the questions are also regarding to this. So I'm going to talk about it in the end in the QA section. Here you can see, for instance, that many of the Annex 11 section numbers corresponds to Part 11. Some part of it are more details about risk management or suppliers and so on, but they are very comparable. All of these are comparable. By the way, before I go on, I just wanted to say that this slide that you will see, you will receive it by email later on, so you should not be stressed and taking a lot of screenshots and so on, because you will receive the slide. And also, if you want to have a one-to-one meeting with me, you can contact me by email, and you will I will explain and talk with you about these issues. Another part, we can continue on the Annex 11 vs FDA Part 11. You can see that they are very comparable with the FDA sections. So for this reason, I will emphasis and talk about Part 11. Shortly, you can say that Part 11 applies to electronic submission to FDA a lot, but Annex 11 is different from Part 11, that it takes a lot of risk management approach instead, and also emphasize a systemic approach for periodic evaluations. This part I will also bring up a lot during the discussions. And in general, you can say that Annex 11 is a little bit how to, while Part 11 is you shall do this. But together they form a robust and usable guideline for computer validation and professional leading regarding data integrity, basically. So in the continuing parts of the webinar, I will focus mostly on FDA rules, but the same rules, of course, and the technical solution to them will comply with most of the regulation from all of the world, basically. They are the same. So to discuss now, a little bit about data integrity, and I wanted to give you a basic information so we have the same terminology that we discuss and same understanding on what data integrity is. And I like particularly the MHRR's terminology a little bit better because they write things in a better way, a little bit more understandable way. So some of the terminology you will see, you will recognize if you have read their guidelines and so on. So, but for instance, the ALCOA terminology, etc. So I will continue with that and just give you a basic knowledge. Basically, this may be for some of you, this you already know and understand, but it is important to have a good baseline to build on for the rest of the seminar. So what is data integrity? It's about to create complete, consistent, and accurate data. Accurate data should be attributable, legible, contemporaneous, recorded, original or true copy, and accurate, basically. And when I'm saying data, I mean not only the actual files or information that is generated by a system, but also all the around the metadata that exists with it. What kind of software generated it, what kind of instrument generated it, and all the configuration that existed at the time that the system was generated the data, all the important parts that are around this data is included. When I say data, I mean all of this stuff. It is important to have good documentation for practices for static and dynamic records internally. We will touch base on that later. And what is important that the data integrity should be maintained through the data lifecycle. That means when you create the data, when you process it, when you archive it, and finally when you dispose it after the records retention period. And what is a data trustworthy record characteristics then? It needs to be reliable, complete, and accurate. With complete, I mean that it needs to have all the metadata around the data, who generated the information, from what type of instrument was the data generated, and it needs to be enough accurate so you can understand, and you should not rely on additional analysis. You should have basically the raw data basically always available as well. We will discuss about that. It needs to be authentic, and you need to prove that the data is proof of what it's supposed to be, and it needs to be complete and unaltered, the data. So you need to have both technological tools to make sure that the data is complete and unaltered, and also procedures to maintain that. And the data needs to be usable, and many times it needs to be usable for many years, and that means that it can be located, retrieved, presented, and interpreted. So some of the data that you collect, maybe you need to collect and contain for 20-30 years, and it is very difficult to know what happens in the future, but the data should be able to be located, retrieved, presented, and interpreted. So a little bit more about the ALCOA. A means attributable, so all the data that is generated needs to be traceable to a unique individual, and a unique instrument, or a unique event, basically, where the data was generated. And L is legible. The data needs to be recorded permanently and be readable, basically. And the C is contributously, and then that means basically that activity around the data should be recorded at the time that they occur, and we will touch base on this part as well. And it is very important that you can almost replay what happened when the data was generated, modified, and created in the past, basically. And the data needs to be original or a true copy, and it needs to be the first capture of data and not transcribed data. One example is when you have chromatographic data that you collect and do some analysis on it and get the final result that you put in a report. Because you have manipulated the data and done a lot of analysis on it to make it knowable, it's good, but you have to always save the original data as well. So you can always go back and reanalyze it if it is needed, basically, the original record. And the data needs to be accurate, and this is achieved through the quality management system that the company needs to have. It needs to be rules and guidelines and policies regarding the data integrity that we will also discuss in the meeting. So now we have covered some basics about the data and data integrity and what we mean with data. Feel free to submit some questions in the chat panel that you should have, and it will be collected and answered in the end of the seminar. Next, I wanted to talk about the audit trail with practical examples. The reason that I do that because is that the effect of audit trail and the difficulties with audit trails from practical point, it's many times not considered enough. So I will go through that with a practical example. So first of all, what is an audit trail? It is a secure computer-generated timestamp electronic records that allows for reconstruction of events related to creation, modification, or deletion of an electronic record. So, and basically you need to know who did what and why of a record. And this record should not be altered by itself, for instance, and it needs to be timestamped as well. And you should track all the actions at the record or at system level so you can understand what happened when the data was generated, basically. And audit trail is also a security measure to keeping practice to prevent data from being lost or obscured. And some of the things that is expected that audit trail captures is overwriting of data, runs that has been aborted, for instance, needs to be captured, and testing into compliance needs to be captured by audit trail. Testing in compliance is that you perhaps make a measurement with the instrument and do some analytics on it, and the data, the result comes out badly, so you redo it again and again and again, a couple of times, and one of the times suddenly your values jumps inside of your range of error, and then you take that sample and add it to the batch, basically. So this is, of course, is not the proper way to do it, and the audit trail should capture that as well. It should, of course, capture that you have deleted data or you change the date of the data and also alter the data, for instance. And finally, what is most important and also most difficult, that is going to be more important in the future when the regulatory authorities review your systems and so on. Audit trails are completely meaningless without auditing them. So all the companies must have tools and routines to audit their own audit trails. And many companies don't have this kind of routines already. So you need to document also that you have done that when the reviewer comes. Now I'm going to take an example, a practical example for audit trail. This example is related to pharma production, basically producing of sanitized drugs. And a lot of times when you buy equipment to perform what you need to do, sometimes this equipment are based on SIEM and SIEMatic WinCCC, and they are performing different activities in your clean room, basically. And there is building modules for SIEMatic Siemens. They are called SIEMatic WinCCC that provide you all the data integrity aspects that needs to be there so you can be compliant. And usually when you put requirement specification for vendors to purchase equipment or production tools, these requirements needs to be there. And usually to have data integrity the functionalities inside of your equipment will cost additionally 2,000 to 3,000 euro more from software development and implementation point of view, and additional cost for the hardware. And these modules are not so that costly in reality, even if some of your vendors tell you that. So, but for instance, as you can see, if you go to the Siemens own website for purchasing these modules, they are not that costly, as you can see here. And so you can buy these products and integrate it into the functionality of the device that is used for your manufacturing, basically. So this is one of the examples that I wanted to bring up. And this is how it can look like on a touch screen in your clean room. Basically, this is an example of an audit trail. You can see on the last column called checksum, there are checksum calculated for every action that happens within the system. And in column number 2, you see the timestamp. And the timestamp is actually one of the big difficulties because all of your equipment needs to be connected and synchronized to the main clock. And you need to also be able to handle when the shift comes from summertime to wintertime, etc. And there you can see delta to UTC, the next column that is important, where you can see handle this kind of issues. And you have the user ID, the object ID, and what happened, basically, and some comments. So this is a very simple audit trail example. that you can see on a display in a clean room or your machines, and you can export it and read it and so on. So this is a tool that exists as a model that can be purchased basically to have this kind of technological needs. And this example that I bring up is actually a sterilization machine from Getinge. In Swedish, we will say that it's an autoclave, and for instance, they sell this many of their solutions with a PAX 3000 system where they have included data integrity and all of this stuff inside of it. But many of vendors, they don't buy their own software because they don't have a good validation routines to validate everything. And therefore they have sterilization machines that don't have all the technical aspects needed to have a full data integrity basically. But this is a mistake that many companies, I know that they do. So when you put the requirement and to purchasing your machines, you need to have proper routines for how to do that basically. Another example for this is that if you have a very complex software and a very complex different type of systems that generate a lot of audit logs, etc. This has not been so common in the past, but in the future, when the pharma industry is becoming more digitalized, this will continue. And within the security system, there is a lot of more tools and information regarding this. For instance, there is something that is called security information event management tools, where you can get all the logs that exist in many places, and the logs can be very complex and contain a lot of information, and these logs can be then collected and displayed to generate good dash views or reviews. So this is another aspect of the spectrum. Basically, these tools has not been existing for the pharma industry in the past, but they are starting to be more common now. And one example of that is that when you're going to do your own audit of the system, you will have some dashboards that you can see, basically user login frequency for different systems, unusual access to functionalities. You should be able to see all of this stuff and show unusual patterns basically. And this kind of tools is very good to have. They can automatically generate audit review documents that can be sent out for double check, etc., and capture all of these aspects of audit trail. Yes. Okay. Now we have covered audit trail and what it should do and the difficulties with it. Audit trail is very important, and usually when customers put requirements on audit trail, they put a few requirements, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, or sometimes they just take the part 11 requirements straight ahead and put it in their requirement list. But in practice, you need to have 20, 30, 40 plus different requirements just related to audit trail. So this is very important to do it right and make sure that you have the right tool for your disposal when you purchase or you develop customized systems. Okay, next I'm going to talk about data integrity quality system in general, and take a little bit time now and put down some questions about audit trail if you have to us again, and in the end we will manage it. So let's continue. Okay, a lot of times data integrity is managed project per project. So in a big company or a small company, you suddenly come to this discussion about data integrity and how to manage the data. And of course, depending on the instrument or solution that you use, you have increasing data integrity. So it's very important that you should have a quality system how to manage data integrity and some helpful procedures and routines. And in this session, we're going to talk about that part. So this is some of the risk part of it. So let's continue. So more than often, this situation is actually happening. So you're very focused on your own project, and maybe data integrity is just a small portion of it, and you just go ahead and don't want to stop the project or the things that you want to do. You just wanted to go on and do your FAT, your SAT, and get the equipment home or implement the things that you wanted to implement if it is an IT system or support system. So it's very important to have this in place. And what you don't want to have is this kind of warning letters, and it is required by the FDA and other regulatory appointments that you have a procedure to manage data, and you have to have a proper process to evaluate different kind of systems and written down if the data integrity is applied or not, and assess risk and take predefined actions dependent on the risk. And when you get such a letter, and I hope that nobody will get it, what they recommend is that you get competencies from outside so they can come in and do a review of all of your data basically and propose how you can fix things. This is the right side. It's actually a real warning letter from FDA basically. And there are some guidelines regarding this that you can have the link on the left side. So it all starts with having a policy. So data integrity cannot be created from bottom up. Usually it needs to come from top down. So the company needs to have a data policy, data integrity policy. It needs to define different responsibility for different type of people in their organization. And this is an example of that. And these documents needs to be approved and available, and most of the people that works with this kind of things needs to read, so they have to have a knowledge about these policies. And usually everything starts with doing a high-level risk assessment of your systems that you have, and what is more important, that you should have at least someone in your company that are very knowledgeable about this stuff, so you can perform this risk analysis and this assessment in a proper way, because data integrity isn't that hard if you have knowledge about IT and you have knowledge about the intended use, etc., and the regulation. It is not that hard to do correct assessments. So, and usually when you have identified your system level of risk, there is a very clear pathway what you should do. For low, medium, and high risk, for instance, you should have a set of documentation that needs to exist. And you should be able to manage how much work that you have to do in validation of this such a system or requirement part of it. And for instance, depending on the level of risk, a periodic review frequency of the whole system needs to be defined, and how much investigation of your supplier you need to do. All of this needs to be streamlined within your quality system. And the difficulty is to determine the following question. Does this system generate only electronic record or electronic record and electronic signatures? And this is very important. And There are usually some questions that you have to answer during these sessions when you're going to define and estimate the systems. And these questions is as follows. Is the system used to generate, maintain, and store regulated data as electronic records and are required by regulatory authorities and are relied on to perform regulatory activities? So if you put yes on any of these boxes, then you should have an electronic record or electronic record with electronic signature, basically. So uh, uh, this is very important to document and have a review of and document that all of the systems that you have such a classification of the system, and this needs to be also saved during and your regulatory activities, basically. And there are some other questions here. So will the system intend to store and use electronic signature and consider them as official for the identified system is one of the questions. And there are a few type of questions that you can put. This is another example that is similar, basically. So yes, and it's very important to answer this in a proper way. And what is important is that when you do this kind of risk assessment for a system, you have to make sure that you have somebody in your company that is very knowledgeable about this, that depending on who is within these meetings, that the outcome will not be different, basically. So it is very important. And a lot of times companies are very conservative regarding this. They don't need to be so conservative about data integrity. The problem is that they are too conservative, more than less conservative. So I'm going to talk about the gap assessment. So for instance, if you have defined your system and defined its intended use and map the type of data that the system generates and what the data should be used for, and you had your assessment within a group of people that needs to be defined by your policies and routines, then the first thing that you generally do is doing a gap assessment. And this gap assessment is a huge document with requirements on the left. And sometimes you do it with a supplier. Sometimes you do it if you want to develop something internally, advanced software or what. So you have to define how each of these requirements will be fulfilled. And you have to also define who is responsible to fulfilling these requirements. And as many of these requirements cannot be fulfilled just by technical aspects or by your supplier, and they require also that your end client will or yourself needs to take responsibility, basically. So the gap assessment is very important to do. And I really recommend that before you or during your project, when you are managing data integrity, you should go to the FDA site where you find warning letters, etc., and you should search for data integrity. And if you search for data integrity, you will see a lot of practical examples on how not to do. And your project manager or the team members of the project for doing whatever you want to do should read some of these letters and maybe identify some of the routines and some of the things that you are planning to do that you should not do, basically. So this is very important to look. Many of these warning letters comes from some countries, China or India or whatever, that they have the pharma companies are not that big, or you know, so some of them are, you think it's completely, of course they should not do that, you know, and some of them are more tricky. So go through this, and it's a fun thing to do. Also, people will laugh and look and read together for some warning letters. So everybody should have a session and go through all of this stuff. An example of this is something that I see even now with some companies in Sweden as well, that people are collecting data with USB or others and moving the data physically from one system to another system. That is very common that you still do that stuff. And what is also more common, that you have logins into analytic tools or whatever that is not uniquely bound to one specific user, so everybody have the same user and the shared password. That is not good, basically. So I see that a lot. So these kind of things, you can see and understand what is required. And finally, the end of this, what is important from a quality point of view for your own company, you should at least once every year have a very quick internal audit yourself. And this is good to have, just to be prepared if questions come from other auditors that come to you, and everybody maybe is not as stressed or pressured when reviewers enter your door, and you can feel that you have things under control, basically. And you have to basically ask 5 key data integrity questions. Is electronic data available? Is the data reviewed? Is the metadata, audit trails reviewed, etc.? Regulatory, what I talked about before. Is it a clear segregation of duties? That is that users cannot grant password or authority to each other, and look at the validation documentation for the systems, of course, and the answers to this question will determine if the companies are compliant with Part 11 or not. So this is a very, very important to do internally, and it's better to have that beforehand instead of discovering it if a regulatory body comes and find problems to your system, basically. So you get the warning letters. And usually you start with a specific record and go backwards, basically. And you need to be able to see who, what, when, why, where, and if you have all of these parts together and you have done your internal audit once, then you will not get a problem if you get an auditor. So now I'm going to talk about some difficulties with data integrity more in detail and emphasize them. And please think a little bit now and put some questions again for the QA session in the end of the seminar, and we try to answer that. All right, let's continue. Okay. There are a lot of difficulties to have a correct data integrity in your systems, and we're going to talk about it. So first of all, what is important is that there is no Part 11 data integrity system off the shelf that you can buy. All vendors that say that, they are basically wrong. All responsibility for data integrity is relied by you as a manufacturer or so. So you cannot have a software or a tool that is automatically by design, by technical aspects, is data integrity. So you need to have procedures for systems, you need to have SOPs, you need to have administration. So all of these parts needs to come together. And what is difficult with data integrity is that many things. So we're going to go through some of the points that are here. And some of the points I will touch base on again. So let's continue. One part of the difficulties of that is that you need to segregate duties. So, for instance, for example, if you have a laboratory, somebody that works in the laboratory should not have administration rights to give other people access to the systems or give them extended access to new functionalities. So this needs to be done by somebody else in your organization, and you need to have some routines for applying for access or extended possibilities. So and absolutely no shared logins should exist. It's very important to have that. We're going to talk about how we do identity and login credential management later on. And this is a different problem that I could talk 90 minutes about, but you will understand what it is. So you need to have unique ID for all the users, and you have to segregate of duties. It's very important. And one thing that is also very, very difficult is the ability to generate accurate and complete copies of the records in both human readable and electronic form, suitable for inspection, review, and copying. And for more complex system, this is something that is missed, and a lot of requirements are not put in place and validated for this section. So basically you have some kind of raw data that comes out that is very hard to review and understand and doesn't fulfill this requirement very easily. And this causes a lot of inefficiency in the company. And yes, so this is what I wanted to talk about. And one other thing that is difficult is user-independent computer-generated timestamped audit trails. I see a lot of often, mostly with the systems that are assay systems that generate assay results, etc. Many times. They don't have proper audit trails. A proper audit trail needs to have a timestamp that the time is actually really coming from a central clock, and it also the log needs to be also be secured somehow with the checksums and so on, so you can see the integrity of the audit log. And also the audit log should not contain a lot of information, so it is completely unreadable basically. So you have tons, millions and millions of logs that is collected sometimes with the log, and you will just you cannot find anything within you cannot see the trees for the you know, for the wood. And this is very controversial and difficult, and it is most of the time not considered at all, because people that are developing or buying the system are not the ones that are going to use it in the end. So this is very important again. So audit trail should have all the important user action, logging in, doing tests and so on. And most of the time you need to also put some requirements so you can filter out some part of it, of the audit trail very easily, and to be able to have a very nice, easy way to understand what happened when who did what basically. And when you buy a system or develop a system, you need to answer this kind of questions, like in this example. I will not read the text of it. You can read it afterwards if you want. But this is very important. And I go back again to the tools required, dashboard tools and so on for audit trail review and so on. This is an absolute need for more complex system for companies to be able to do your internal audit more easier and to have control of your data basically. So I go back to this when this I discussed before. And one thing that is difficult also is to to link records and signatures. Sometimes some systems doesn't have the ability to sign the data electronically, but you have a fully compliant data integrity data record. And you get some type of results, and you sign the results by another system, or you put a paper copy of it and sign it per hand. And you need to be able to link these records to signatures in a clear way. And many times you need to have audit trails as well that the system is generated. Audit trail that is related to the data anyway, even if you don't have identity of the person in hand. So this is a very difficult part that I wanted to bring up and discuss. It's important to have the correct tools and correct procedures to manage this. And one other thing is that when you are doing electronic signature on the documents in a closed or open system, there are some regulation regarding that. For instance, when you sign a document, you need to have the name of the signer, and the signer needs to be uniquely identified, of course, date and time, and the meaning of the sign. What was the purpose of the signature, basically? And also there are a lot of different aspects of the signature itself, if you have a closed system or open system, or if you want to comply with the European Union regulations. We will touch base on that later on. The reason that I bring up that the electronic signature shall be unique to one individual is that if you have many systems that have their own management of the users, you have to have some kind of solution to that. It is not manageable to have 50 plus systems or 10 plus systems with many users in each system and manage all of the system at the same time. So we will touch base a little bit regarding this as well. One difficult part is also to have accurate and complete copies of your data and backup. And in practice, this is very difficult, because if you have a validated system and make a complete backup of it, you have to make sure that you have all the aspects of your backup in your system. It's not good enough to make a database dump or save it somewhere. You need to have all the configuration of the system and supporting tools, etc. So you need to have a snapshot of the system, and furthermore, you need to be able to recreate the backup and make sure quickly and easily check that your backup is actually online again and you can use the data. So this is not an easy requirement at all. And during your internal audits that you perform, sometimes you have to make sure that the backup that was taken before of your data can be retrieved and read and used again. And the retention period is also very important here, of course. Most of the time, it is very unclear that how long the data should reside in your company. And furthermore, when data is going to be destroyed, you need to have a process of that as well that clearly shows what you did, why you destroyed it, and what happened. This is very important also to have. And one important topic that I wanted to talk also about is static and dynamic data, because I see many times that people get confused over this terminology. They read static data in some guidance from FDA, and they believe that it is something that it is not, basically. And static data is typically discrete values like temperature or something, and can be easily interpreted. without any data manipulation. So if you have a device that is calibrated and you know what kind of device it is, what kind of tag it is, and you read out some information from the device and you collect it in some kind of record, it is pretty static. If you have all of the metadata around it, what kind of device it was, who did the measurement, etc., etc. It's a quite static data. But dynamic data is should be interpreted as changing data, not dynamic. Basically, one example of dynamic data is chromatographic data. So the chromatographic data that you have, you need to do a lot of calculations and processing of the data before you get something useful. So, and many times when it's required that human interpretation or processing of the data exists. That is what it means with dynamic data. It is not data that is basically changing or whatever. So I just want to clarify the static and dynamic data in the literature. And FDA used this term static and dynamic. So in many places. So static is a fixed data document, a paper record or electronic image, and dynamic means the record format that allows interaction between users and the record, basically. Let's talk about closed versus open system. This is very important because in 99% of the time, you wanted to express that the system you are using is a closed system and not open system. Because if you are classified as an open system, you have to do a lot of more technical parts, technical implementation and validation of the data integrity of the system instead. So what is a closed system? A closed system is an environment which system access is controlled by persons who are responsible for the content of the electronic records that are on the system. So if your company is responsible for the content, is your company control all your access to the data, both physical and logical? So just by logging in remotely doesn't mean that it's open system, basically. And realize that the only difference between open and closed system is the added burden of data encryption and making sure that the data cannot be hacked or security. So so it's very, very important that you document if you see the system as a closed or open. So for multiple reasons. There is actually one question regarding this as well also. So this is some more information about closed versus open system. So if you allow your system to be accessed by anyone where you cannot control who they are, and you can give them access and identify who they are and what they do, then it's actually an open system. But if you can manage and securing the system from security point of view and make sure that nobody can access the system without that the access is given to them, where you can identify who it is, then you can say that the system is closed, basically. So and I will continue a little bit here and talk about identity and access governance now. So now we have covered the difficulties with data integrity. We have covered the quality system that needs to be there and routines that needs to be there. And we have also discussed a lot of things. So let us continue here. When you want to implement access control, you need to have administrate the user of identities, authentication to verify users, and authenticate user access permissions, basically. And you also need to have audit logging to trace all of these activities. And usually this kind of the technology resides within the application or a system that you use. So each application uses its own way to create users, give them access, and so on. And if you have a lot of users, then this will become a lot of application. This will become problematic, of course, because you will have many parallel systems that you need to maintain. This is not a good way to do it. So ideally, you need to externalize this kind of things, the 4As, as much as possible. So commonly used technology to do that in the system is something called LDAP. So when you purchase a system, you should make sure that it can communicate with your centralized administration of user identities. Some of you are using ServiceNow systems for doing this kind of things. And you need to also have a possibility to have a centralized log system for audit log, so you should not rely on that application only to review logs and view them and generate reports, etc. So this is very important to do. And you can do it in different complexity, this basically. And there is something else here as well. If you wanted to have more electronic signatures in multiple systems, you need to manage this as well. So let us continue. How does electronic signature works? And this is related to EIDAS for European Union and in advanced electronic signature. So what you have a lot of data that needs to be cryptographically signed, and you use some hashing algorithms, and you use a user's private key to do a signature. And this signature is cryptographically safe then. And when you're going to verify it, you do the same thing with the data, and you use the user's public key, and you can verify that this person actually approved or not approved this. But the problem is here, the challenge is that you need to have a secure link between the private key and the public key, and how you can retain these keys and manage these keys over time. So if we go back to the 4As, you need to be able to manage all of this stuff. Do application handle key generation, or do you have a strong authentication? If you have a PKI solution, does the keys generated by your own organization or an external organization? Do you distribute your public keys via LDAP, and or do you issue keys with the standard X509 certificates with smart card? How do you manage this? Basically, this is important. And what you have your private keys in many applications inside of the application. They are generated there and they are managed there by user logins. And this is a same problematic as before, because you need to manage all of these public keys and private keys and have control over them. So you can make sure that the keys are related to a certain identity, and they are the private keys are saved in a safe place also. And you can have it in this way, where you identify yourself using the LDAP, but the private key reside inside of application. Basically, this is not good at all either. what you wanted to have is that you want to have your public and private key in a centralized repository in your company, so you can use the same keys for many systems. And when somebody is logging in, they have means to get access to their private key, and they can use it to sign things in the application, basically. So all of these parts needs people that know IT and also know the regulatory requirements regarding that. Now we go to the quality Q&A, and I'm gonna check a little bit with my colleagues to see what kind of questions we have. Let me see if I get some information here. So, okay. I have a couple of questions that I got previously. I'm going to touch base on them because I think it's important for everybody to see it. One of them is in my slide, and I have 2 additional questions that I'm going to answer. So let's start. The first action is in Swedish, but I'm going to interpret it. And you that can read, you can read the questions in Swedish here. It's about electronic signature for companies within the medtech unit. What is the requirement for European Union, not FDA? As I have interpreted that, it is the EIDAS, that is the European regulation, and they define 3 different categories of signatures: basic, advanced, and qualified. But I cannot find which one is required for medical device business. Can you answer this? Most secure e-signatures services are of the type advanced, but they can they offer also that you can add on a certified third party, a trusted service provider, and then they are counted as a qualified signature. Is this necessary to fulfill the European standard for medtech companies? So this is a quite advanced question, and I try to answer this. And to answer this question, I go to the next one and discuss what EIDAS is. EIDAS is a regulatory requirement by the European Union, and they define 3 types of electronic signature. One of them is standard electronic signature, and the standard one is basically what most of the companies is using. That is that you ensure that the record is signed by simply putting the signature information in a database, just like in Excel plain text, but you write who signed what and when, and this who is actually identified as one individual within your company, basically. And this is in a standard database, and basically if somebody from your organization that have admin rights and can access databases and so on can basically go in and change that in the end, but routines and etc. doesn't allow that to happen basically. So this is a regular signatures that are common and are implemented in this way in many applications. So the signature is just a database in entry basically. And then they define advanced electronic signature. With advanced electronic signature, you use cryptographic to sign data. And once this is done, this means even an administrator within your organization cannot alter your signature. They cannot go and do manipulation on it because you're using cryptographic security here. And this is also commonly PKI technology is used to do that basically. And many system allows you to have this kind of signatures, but if you wanted to generate private keys to this individual, somebody needs to be able to say that, well, yes, Albert Einstein is actually Albert Einstein. And this is the private key of the Albert Einstein, unique private key of Albert Einstein's, for instance. And so if you manage everything yourself and generating private key for your employees or people that are accessing your system, this is fine. You can do that, and you have a record of it and everything. But this is called advanced electronic signature technology, basically. So, but there is another variant of it as well, what is called qualificerad electronic signature or qualified electronic signatures. And qualified electronic signature is used to, in general, to sign contracts and legal documents, death certificates, and etc., etc. And QES is a very strict form of ADES, and that means that your private keys needs to be generated by a trusted service provider, basically a different company that ensures that you are who you are and provide you with an electronic signature. Here in Sweden, many of us are used to use BankID, and basically BankID, you will get the electronic identity from your bank, and the bank themselves make sure that you are you, and then give you this private key, basically. All of the banks own private, the company elektronisk identitet, that is BankID, basically. So this has become the common, electronic signature solution, basically, in Sweden. But there are others similar to BankID as well that fulfill these requirements. So this is a difference between them, and in part 11, there is a difference also when you say electronic signature and digital signature. Electronic signature is basically the first one that I explained, and the digital signature, when they write in the digital signature, is the second or the third one, basically. And the difference between the second and third one is that you have a different service provider trusted by everybody that have some routine to give you your private keys, basically. And of course, the technology itself needs to be very safe, for instance, and from security point of view. So that is the difference. And what should you use then? Should you use a QES or ADES? What should you use? And it really depends on your intended use, and it also depends if you have an open vs closed system. And we have some information about how Annex 11 and Part 11 requirements fit together, and for instance, and this is something that is can be clarified very easy, but you have to make sure that you have a closed system and that it all fits together with your intended use, basically. So, and I have two additional questions. Let me see that I got. Let me see. One question is, if we had an incident internally in our company regarding the data integrity, and we want to have support with audits or come up with solutions with the data, can you help us with that, basically? And yes, this is something that Data Ductus can help you with. We can come in and analyze what type of security breaches that exist and what has happened, and we can provide you with basic technical solution and how to resolve it. This is something that we have done in the past, and we can do. This is something that we can support with. And another question is, the backup of the data that resides in the cloud, what does the regulation say about that? And how often should you validate, backup, restore if the data is not internally stored in our company, basically? So I try to translate it from Swedish as well, because some people are written in Swedish. Well, this is a very excellent question, because we're going to touch base regarding these questions also with our second webinar that I spoke about, the how to utilize the cloud. We're going to talk about this part as well. And it is actually a bit tricky, because if your backup is done and it resides in a cloud solution somewhere else, that is very common right now, you need to be able to verify that the backup is actually done and it is a true copy of your system for the future and so on. So this is a very good question, and important question. And the question about how often you should double check that your backup is actually works or not, it depends on your risk assessment that you have done for your system, and it needs to be set beforehand. It is not a IT person or a project member's decision to make. The only decision they should make is that they should define the high-level risk assessment of the full system, and the company in general should have the policy for that. So, and this is something that it's okay for the regulatory people to come when they check to you. If they say, why didn't you do backup check on this system? Then you tell them, well, this is our policies, this is the risk, and our backup will be every 2 years. So we have not done 2 years for 2 years yet. Next year we will do it. And that's fine for them most of the time. I know that some regulators from Japan, they, for some system, they wanted to that you do it more often, every year and so, but then if it is like this, you can change your policies, and that is that, basically. All right, I have no more questions, it seems. I'm just gonna check with my panelists to see.
Yes, you have questions actually.
I have question. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Är Annex 11 tillämpligt för medicintekniska produkter? Jag trodde det var mer medicinal products.
Well, I think it is applicable for that as well. And you need, yes, but you know, even if Annex 11 is just for drugs, you can find exactly the same regulations for medical device or IVDR as well. So in general, all of this regulation that comes, that exist, they are containing the same aspects. And in the end, the solution that you need to provide and fulfill, they will map into everything, you know. So, and yeah, I can sit here and answer a lot of regulatory questions about regulatory requirements from Japan, Brazil, or England, or Britain, and you will not see end of it, basically. But finally, in the end, you need to have some part if you fulfill a few of them or one or two of them, you are sure that you're going to fulfill all of them, basically. Yeah. I don't know if that was a good answer or not, but we can have offline discussions if it is required. Is there another question?
No, now we're done.
We are done. Okay, sounds great. So thank you all for coming, and please come to our medical cloud solution where we talk about how to utilize new technology and for you to create this dashboard that I talk with you. And we are also sending you all the materials and the link for the webinar as well. So I hope that this was good for you. And if you wanted to talk with me privately directly, please email me and book a slot and we can have a video call together. Thanks a lot.